The stagecoach ground to a halt in a haze of red dust, and from its door stepped a young woman, her faded blue dress stained at the hem, hands trembling as they clutched a worn satchel holding nothing but a cold letter and a loose wedding band. Evelyn Ward, 25, had wagered her entire life on a marriage without love, trading herself for a roof overhead and bread enough to feed her 2 children. From the porches of Burnt Hollow, townsfolk leaned into the shade, whispering, "Marry Silent Cole, and you've buried yourself alive." Cole, the man shrouded in mystery, living in solitude on the edge of town, was said to be more dangerous than bullets themselves. Yet Evelyn did not bow her head, for behind her yawned the chasm of despair. And that ill-fitting ring, gleaming awkwardly in the morning light, seemed less a token of surrender than a flickering spark, carrying a question none dared voice aloud. Could destiny kindle a beginning, even out of a union as cold as this? Wyoming Territory, spring of 1883. The morning sun fell pale upon the red dirt road that cut into Burnt Hollow, a town of weather-beaten timber fronts leaning into the prairie wind. Gusts drove the dust into low clouds, clinging to window panes already dulled by years of grit. The heavy groan of iron wheels broke the stillness, and a pair of lathered horses snorted white breath into the air, winter's chill not yet gone from the sky. The stagecoach shuddered to a stop. The door swung open. A young woman descended, slight in frame, her faded blue dress stained at the hem with road dust. Her hand shook as it clutched a small satchel. Inside lay a single crumpled letter and a wedding band too loose for her finger. Her name was Evelyn Ward, 25 years old, and in her eyes lingered the weary light of one who had already walked too many wrong roads. No one came to greet her. Only a few sidelong glances drifted her way, curiosity mingled with disdain, from the porch of the saloon and the general store. Word of her arrival had traveled faster than the stage, carried in low voices and half smiles. She's marrying Silent Cole. What kind of woman binds herself to a man like that? Heads shook as if she had stepped straight into a wager no sane soul would take. Cole Thatcher. That name alone set the town on edge. They called him by a title half sneer, half warning. Silent Cole. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his words cut short, clean, as if each one were struck by an axe. For years he had lived alone beyond the town's edge, in a cabin far from any lamplight. No friends, no kin. More rumor than truth surrounded him, stories whispered over whiskey. Some said he'd beaten a drunk near to death in a saloon fight. Others swore he'd once faced down a gang of armed men and left them crawling away in shame. Whatever the measure of truth, Burnt Hollow had marked him dangerous, strange, the sort of man mothers warned their daughters to keep away from. Evelyn had no room for such warnings. All she held on to was the letter written in a hand as stark as the man's reputation. I am not seeking love. I need a wife to quiet the talk. I have a house, I have land. You may have both if you agree. Nothing more. No sweet words. No tender promises. Just the bare bones of an arrangement, as blunt as a fence post driven into hard ground. Yet Evelyn had clutched that offer as a drowning soul might cling to driftwood. Her life until then had been nothing but loss. The first man who swore he would give her a home had vanished without a trace, leaving only a hollow ache where trust had once lived. Then her own younger sister had stolen what little money remained, fleeing east and abandoning Evelyn with 2 children, Daniel, 6, and Matthew, 3. Night after night she lay awake, listening to the fragile breath of her sons, never knowing what scrap of food would see them through the next day. In that despair, Cole's cold words had looked like salvation. Evelyn set her first step onto Burnt Hollow Street. She felt the weight of eyes upon her, a net of judgment she had no strength left to resist. She lowered her gaze, clutching the satchel to her chest. Her heart pounded, not from shame but from the knowledge that a few more paces ahead lay the place she must call home. On the saloon porch, a knot of men leaned back in their chairs, murmuring, "Foolish girl, marrying Cole Thatcher is burying yourself alive." A gray-haired woman selling bread paused, shook her head, and sighed, "So young, with 2 little ones. Why gamble everything so?" Evelyn let the words pass over her like wind. For her, this choice was not born of courage, but of nothing left to lose. The town itself looked rough-hewn, a main street thick with dust, a scatter of tin-roofed shops, a small church crouched at the far corner, and rows of sod houses hugging the earth. There was chatter, laughter even, but around Cole's name hung a silence no one dared disturb. He did not appear that morning. She had known he would not. Cole Thatcher wasted no steps on town business unless forced. Evelyn paused beneath a sagging awning, lifting her eyes toward the silver-gray clouds trailing the distant mountains. In her heart she read again each line of that letter. No love, no promise. Only an arrangement, plain and unyielding. Yet perhaps that stark honesty was why she could trust it. After so many honeyed lies, what she needed now was not romance, but a wall against the wind, a roof for her children, a ground steady enough to build what remained of life. The ring slipping loose upon her finger gleamed oddly in the morning light, ill-fitting as everything else in her life had been. Yet it glimmered still, as if to remind her that even a forced beginning was still a beginning. The snort of horses brought her back. Drawing a long breath, Evelyn lifted her skirts and started forward. Dust clung to the hem, but she did not slow. Each step was a vow that the wreckage behind her was done, and she was walking toward a future with no blessing but her own resolve. Burnt Hollow bustled on, a chorus of voices rising behind her. Yet within Evelyn there was only one sound, the steady beat of a heart that refused to yield, thudding in time with the dry wind sweeping the western plain. The road ahead led to a lonely cabin at the town's edge, to the silent man who waited there. And for her, that was the only place left that could be called living. Evelyn Ward had never imagined herself walking into a wedding so barren of joy. Yet her life had stripped her of every other choice. 2 abandonments had left her heart hollow, her spirit worn thin. Only her 2 young sons gave her reason to press forward. And because of them, she had done the unthinkable, left them behind in her parents' care, trusting the frailty of old hands, while she alone stepped into a marriage as cold as stone. She knew she could not bring them to this uncertain land, not until she had tested whether the roof awaiting her was shelter or mirage. So before leaving, she bent low, kissing Daniel's tangled hair and Matthew's round cheek, whispering a vow only the walls heard. "Mama will come for you when it's safe." That promise weighed on her with every step, heavy as the ill-fitting band circling her finger. The wedding took place in the cramped office of Burnt Hollow's judge. No flowers, no church bells, no kin nor friend. Only a scarred desk, a pen dry of ink, and a slip of paper bearing hurried words of record. Evelyn wore her faded blue dress, the last whole garment left to hers after years of hardship. Her hair was drawn tight. No veil, no bloom, as if this were but another ordinary day. Cole Thatcher entered in a shirt white as fresh snow, stiff from never having been worn before. It was the only mark that this day was set apart, yet it made him look more awkward, as though ceremony were a suit that never fit. When the judge called for vows, Cole's voice rasped low, each word falling short and final, like blows of an axe. No hesitation, no softness. The words were read, then silence reclaimed him. Evelyn searched his face, hoping for the faintest tremor of warmth, but found none. Only eyes dark as coal, fixed straight ahead. Yet when their gazes brushed, he did not look away. That, in itself, was something. A steadiness without tenderness, but steadiness all the same. When the judge spoke the final pronouncement, no one clapped. In the hallway outside, shadows lingered, whispering. Evelyn caught them clear as bells. She really did marry Silent Cole. A scoff followed, then a sigh of pity. She did not answer, for shame had already been drained from her veins. What remained was resolve, a roof to raise, a place to reclaim her sons. By late afternoon, Cole led her out of town. They rode in an old wagon, iron wheels groaning, red dust rising in veils behind them. Evelyn wrapped her shawl close, arms circling the empty space at her side where Daniel and Matthew should have been. Cole held the reins with the stillness of stone. The prairie stretched wide and lonely, broken only by hoofbeats and wind cutting sharp past their ears. After a long mile, his voice broke the hush, gravelly and spare. "I will not hurt you." 4 simple words. Yet they sent a shiver through her. She turned, watching the planes of his face, rigid and closed. Was it a promise, or only a thing said because silence demanded relief? She could not tell. But it hung between them, a marker on this road with no witness but the wind. "I know," she answered softly, though belief had not yet found root. The homestead showed itself under the falling dusk. A timber house crouched in a hollow, cottonwoods guarding its edges. Beside it, a horse barn, a sagging fence, a chicken coop, and a storehouse. A black dog barked once, hoarse and sharp, then quieted when Cole stepped down. Evelyn followed, her chest tugged by a strange blend of fear and something almost like safety. This, for better or worse, was the place she must call beginning. Inside, the house was bare-boned. A stone hearth, a handful of rough-hewn chairs, a scarred table, a stack of tin plates, a rifle mounted on the wall. The air smelled of pine sap and gun oil. No cloths, no curtains, no woman's touch. Cole set down her satchel and said, flat as hammered iron, "You take the room, I'll keep to the loft." Nothing more. That first night, Evelyn lay awake, listening to the wind seep through the cracks and the restless stir of horses outside. Grief for her boys burned behind her eyes, but just as sleep began to pull at her, a glimmer of lamplight drew her gaze toward the barn. She rose, wrapped her shawl, and stepped out. In the thin glow, she saw a wooden frame set upon a stand. Smooth, curved boards bent into a shape she knew too well. When her hand touched it, her heart faltered. It was a cradle, unfinished, its rails still raw. Footsteps sounded. Cole stood behind her, sawdust clinging to his hands. Her voice rasped, "Who is this for?" He wiped his palms on a rag and said, flat as before, "For the dog." Evelyn looked into his eyes, then let out a weary, crooked smile, half bitter, half tender. No dog ever needed a cradle with a rocker. She did not wait for an answer. Cole said nothing, his shadow long against the barn wall, mingling with the scent of pine resin and cool night air. Evelyn turned back, her chest aching, the image of that half-made cradle fastening itself to her heart. A secret unspoken, or a promise he could not shape into words. And there, on the very first night, Evelyn knew this marriage bore no flowers, no blessings. Yet perhaps, just perhaps, it carried the seed of something neither of them dared name. In those first days at Cole's homestead, Evelyn felt as though she had stepped into a land where sound itself had died. The timber house stood low in the hollow, swallowed by the gray-green of cottonwoods and the distant rise of mountains. It was sturdy enough to hold back wind, solid enough to keep out rain, but far too empty to be called a home. Inside, the space seemed to widen with the absence of familiar voices. No laughter from Daniel, no whimper from Matthew. Only the hiss of wind through the eaves, the groan of boards beneath her feet, and a silence thick as stone walls. Cole lived just as the townsfolk had whispered, wordless, pared down, giving nothing of himself beyond the work that needed doing. Each dawn he rose before light, went to the horses, checked the fence line, hauled water from the well. All of it done in silence. Evelyn woke in her narrow room to the sound of a door closing, and then nothing but the stillness he left behind. No greeting, no parting word. So she turned to what she could touch. She coaxed flame from dry kindling, stirred plain breakfasts in the iron pot, swept dust from chairs that had long since given up their shine. She shook the horse oil smell from old blankets, built for herself the rhythm of habit so that hours did not drag her under. Yet every time the sun filtered through the small window pane, her heart ached with memory. The way Daniel would run circles around the table, the way Matthew would tug at her skirts with his soft, clumsy words. Here there was only an empty chair. Cole was never cruel. He did not slam doors, did not raise his voice, did not break things in anger. But his silence had a weight sharper than any shout. At meals, he gave her a brief nod when she set down food, then ate with head bowed, the scrape of cutlery the only sound between them. When she tried, now and then, to stir conversation about the soil, the weather, his answers came clipped, one word at a time. Fine. Maybe. Enough. Then silence again. It made Evelyn feel as though she lived beside a wall of flesh and bone, a wall that worked from sunup to sundown, yet allowed no foothold, no crack where she might reach through. She did not blame him. She had not come here for love. But at times, a quiet resentment stirred in her. If he wanted a wife, why will he not open his mouth enough to show I exist? Evenings, she stitched worn hems or set pen to paper, scribbling fragments of thought she hardly dared call a journal. Cole would take himself outside, pacing the yard or sitting long on the porch rail, only returning late to climb to the loft where he slept apart. She lay alone beneath the quilt, ears ringing with stillness, haunted by the echo of her boys, Daniel murmuring "Mama" in his sleep, Matthew clinging to her skirts. She bit her lip until it bled, swallowing the sob that rose. And yet, something in her refused to break. Out of that silence, she began to watch. She noticed how Cole's rough hands slowed when a horse limped, patient over each nick and strain. She saw that he wasted nothing, shaping even scrap wood into boxes or patching slats in the fence. And sometimes, In the fading light, she caught his gaze resting on her, quick, then gone, as if he were guarding himself, afraid of what might slip free. One afternoon, she carried cornbread to the barn, daring to sit beside him on a length of timber. He looked up, startled, but did not turn her away. They ate without talk until the black dog came loping, tail wagging at their feet. Cole's voice broke the long quiet. His name's Bristle. Low and husky, but softened. Evelyn smiled faintly. At least someone in this place has a name from you. He did not reply, only broke bread for the dog. But in that moment, she felt the wall between them shift, thin enough to glimpse what lay behind. Night fell, and Evelyn sat by the window, the cottonwoods silvered under a pale slice of moon. She thought of Daniel and Matthew, of the vow to bring them here when the ground was steady. Could she carve warmth into this silence? Could the man upstairs ever allow it? Or would this always remain a contract, bare and hollow, she with a roof, he with a mask, and nothing more? Time moved slow, heavy as the prairie dusk. Yet within her, a strange patience began to grow. Perhaps silence was not only a wall, but a brace keeping Cole upright. Perhaps if she waited, the cracks might widen. She clenched her hands together and whispered into the dark, "I did not come here to surrender. I came to build again." The words vanished into the hush of the house, but inside her, they lingered, steady as a new heartbeat, rising in a home that belonged to silence. That day, Evelyn chose to tend the little kitchen. Noon light slipped through the narrow window, laying pale bars of gold across the warped floorboards. The air was thick with pine resin and old smoke, laced with the metallic tang of rusted knives hanging on the wall. She rolled her sleeves, opened the cupboards one by one, and wiped away years of dust. The top shelf held nothing but empty tins and coils of worn rope. But when she bent to the lower drawer, her fingers brushed something flat and firm. It was a small book, bound in leather scuffed soft by time, its corners frayed like it had ridden through too many seasons. She sank into a chair, opened the first page, and the words stopped her breath. For when she stays. Her eyes traveled down the uneven scrawl. Not declarations of love, no scraps of poetry. Only a list, plain as fence posts. Mend the north line. Build an extra bed. Buy corn seed. Patch the barn roof. Dig a second well. Tasks as ordinary as daylight. And yet Evelyn's throat tightened. The man burnt hollow named Silent Cole, the man who had spoken his vows like hammer blows, had once sat here writing plans for the presence of another. Not merely a wife to keep off prying eyes, as he had written in his letter, no. These words hinted at permanence, at preparation. And though he had never named her, she felt the shape of herself in those lines. She closed the book gently, clutching it as if it might dissolve in her hands. Her heart pulled two ways at once, stirred and uncertain. If he wanted her here, why had he never said so? Or was he so afraid that words might undo what his hands were building, that he had left them trapped in ink instead? Evelyn slid the book back to its place, keeping her discovery as her own. To speak of it, she feared, would only thicken the wall of silence between them. That afternoon, Cole moved about the yard, hammering planks, splitting logs, never once asking for help. Evelyn watched from the porch, noting the sure rhythm of his shoulders, the clean strength of his arms. In the tilted sunlight, he looked carved from darker stone, enduring, solitary. untouchable. By nightfall, the woods had gone still. Evelyn followed the glow of a lantern into the barn. Cole sat on a timber bench, knife in hand, drawing the blade slow against the whetstone. Before him lay a block of wood, half-shaped, its grain smoothed into a form she couldn't yet name. "What are you making?" Her voice was soft, careful, like a pebble tossed into a still pond. Cole lifted his head, eyes flickering quick, as though caught with something forbidden. He hesitated, then said, blunt as ever, "Nothing." Evelyn touched the sanded edge. The grain ran satin under her fingers, warm from his work. A smile tugged her lips, weary yet edged with challenge. "You're no liar, Cole Thatcher, but you are a clumsy one." His gaze darkened, shadows slipping across his face. He offered no denial, no excuse, only bent again to his knife, as though silence itself might erase her words. But she had seen it, a flicker in his eyes, like a flame hidden too long, sparking once before dimming. She asked nothing more. She turned, leaving the scent of pine shavings and the scrape of steel behind her. Yet inside something stirred, like water rising beneath rock. She had glimpsed a man who built, who recorded with unsteady hand, who tried to speak with wood when his tongue would not. A man who knew how to prepare, even if he did not know how to say why. That night, Evelyn lay restless, her mind drifting to Daniel and Matthew. By now, they would be asleep in the old house, their grandmother humming them into dreams. Her heart tore at the memory of her promise. "I'll bring you home when there is a place for you." Could this stark cabin, with its silent master, ever be that place? But then she remembered the ledger, "For when she stays," and the thought warmed her like a thin quilt. Perhaps, however clumsy, Cole had already left a door unlatched. At dawn, she stepped outside for water and found him bent to the fence line, driving nails steady as a clock. She did not speak, only watched. The sure swing of his hammer, the way each strike made the post stand firmer in the earth. And the thought came unbidden. He may not know how to open his mouth, but he knows how to keep something standing. From then on, she listened differently, not for words that would never come, but for the language of labor, the crack of boards joined, the rasp of saw teeth, the measured beat of hooves. Each sound was its own kind of sentence, and with the memory of that hidden book, she knew he had thought of her presence far longer than he had let her see. The house still brimmed with silence, but she began to find its signals. A slower nod, a gaze that lingered a heartbeat longer, a scrap of wood left by the door, as though set aside for her hand. Small things, but enough to teach her patience. That night, as the lamp sputtered and died, Evelyn lay with eyes closed and whispered into the dark. "You may not speak, Cole Thatcher, but I will stay long enough to hear the rest." That spring dragged on with rains that would not cease, and the narrow creek slicing through the hollow swelled into a torrent. Each morning Evelyn went there for water, wooden bucket swinging in her hand. The path sloped gently, green with new shoots of grass, but the rains had turned the earth slick as oil. She stepped with care, slow and measured, yet that morning the air lay calm, the surface of the water flashing like a mirror. For one careless breath, she forgot her footing and set her heel upon a moss-slick stone. Her legs flew from under her. Evelyn gave a sharp cry as her body pitched toward the rushing current. The water snarled, sweeping branches and gravel in its hungry teeth. Her bucket spun away, clattering down the bank. Heart hammering, she flung her arms wide, reaching for anything. Before she could fall, a hand clamped her arm, strong and unyielding, jerking her back. The force spun her into a chest as solid as oak. Cole. He had come from nowhere, swift as the storm itself. He said nothing, only gripped her arm hard enough to steady both their bodies. Mud splashed high, water spraying cold about them. His boots sank deep, but he held fast. His breath burned against her hair, ragged, as though he himself had brushed death. Evelyn stood reeling, her pulse wild, not from the drop, but from the raw certainty of him anchoring her. For a long beat they stood, listening to the roar of water, the whip of wind through cottonwoods. Then Cole nodded once, released her, and stepped down the bank to fetch the bucket that had lodged against the reeds. He lifted it, dripping, and set it back in her hands. She whispered thanks, voice thin. He did not answer, only dipped his head again, as if the matter was finished. His trousers clung wet to his knees, mud streaked his boots, but he gave no notice. Turning, he led the way home. Evelyn followed, heart still unsteady. With every step through the sucking mud, she replayed the sound of him rushing to catch her. The thud of boots, the pull of his grip. It was no word, no vow, but it rang louder than either. For the first time she felt the weight of his protection, not in cold eyes, not in clipped answers, but in reflex, fierce, unthinking, absolute. By the time they reached the house, the sun had burned higher. Evelyn set the bucket on the table, hands trembling so that she clutched her skirt to still them. Cole came behind, water dripping from his hems, shoulders broad enough to fill the doorway. She turned, and their eyes met. What she saw was no stone wall, no hollow man, but someone who had thrown himself between her and peril without a breath's pause. That image carved itself into her mind, scattering all the old whispers. "You saved me," she said, her voice rough with feeling. Cole inclined his head. No more. But in his glance flickered something she had never seen, a spark that died quick, yet proved he was not empty, only locked tight. A tremor of laughter broke in her, soft and shaking. "Maybe you don't need to say it. I understand." He turned away, shrugging from his sodden shirt, hanging it on a chair. His hands, scarred and sinewed, glistened with rain and shivered faintly from the cold. Evelyn watched, her chest tight with a strange pull of pity and yearning, an urge to reach, and the fear that stopped her hand. That afternoon she busied herself in the kitchen while Cole moved about the porch, hanging his clothes to dry. They spoke no more of it, yet the air between them had changed. No longer two strangers bound only by paper and roof. Something unseen had knotted itself between them, drawn not by promise but by the rescue of one fragile moment. At dusk, Evelyn sat with needle and thread, though each stitch faltered. Her thoughts caught on the morning's eyes, dark and alive for once. She understood now. Cole's silence was not absence, but a tongue untrained. His voice lay in action, and when it came sure. Outside, the wind combed the eaves, bristle barked at some distant stir. Evelyn bent over her mending, heart eased by a fragile glow. She thought, "This man, though silent, is not without a voice, and I will wait to hear it in his own time." When Cole passed the kitchen later, lamplight cast across his face, dry now, beard shadowed and unshaven. Their eyes held. Evelyn nodded, wordless. Cole paused, then gave the faintest nod in return. Agreement unspoken. And from that night forward, Evelyn no longer saw him as Burnt Hollow's silent Cole. He was not heartless. He was only a man who had never learned how to let another hear his heart. And for that very reason, she knew she must stay long enough to listen. That evening, Evelyn meant only to check the hens' nests. The rain had broken at last, leaving the air damp and cool, the earth swollen with water, rich with the smell of turned soil. Passing the barn, she heard the low groan of wood, as if something heavy had been shifted. Curiosity drew her to the door. Inside, where twilight pressed through the slats, she stopped short. There, beside Cole's scattered tools, stood the cradle she had once glimpsed half-made, no longer raw, no longer waiting. The frame gleamed smooth, every curve polished to silk beneath his hand. Rockers arched steady and strong, painted soft white that caught the thin light and glowed. Inside lay a quilt of pale blue cloth, stitched clumsy but earnest, its edges puckered where the seams strained. Evelyn's breath caught. It was not the beauty of it that undid her, but the weight it carried. She stepped closer, fingers trembling as she touched the rail. The cradle rocked gently at her touch, whispering a sigh as if the wood itself remembered lullabies. Her eyes blurred. Tears broke loose, hot against her cheeks. Behind her, footsteps paused at the doorway. Cole's shadow filled the frame, broad shoulders blotting the last of the day's gold. He watched, but said nothing. Evelyn turned, her tears unhidden. Her voice broke as she asked, "How long have you been making this?" His silence stretched. Then his voice came, rough and low. "Since the day you agreed to come." The words split her open. She sank into the small stool nearby, face in her hands, sobs breaking free. Her voice spilled raw, unguarded at last. "I carried another child, after my boys, but I lost it. I never told anyone. Not in the letters. Not to you." The barn closed in with the heaviness of her confession. Cole moved toward her, slow, eyes calm on the surface but strained deep within. He rested his hand on the cradle's rim. "I knew," he said. Evelyn lifted her head, startled. "You knew?" A faint nod. "Didn't need words. I saw it in your eyes, in the way you carried yourself. So I built it anyway. Because—" He faltered, voice thickening. "Because someday you might want to try again." The sentence cut her to the core, not with pain, but with a tenderness so fierce it undid her. She wept harder, clutching the edge of the stool to steady herself. The man who seemed all stone had, in his quiet, seen her wound and tried to answer it with his hands. As she wiped her eyes, her gaze caught a seam in the wood. Something thin was wedged there. She pulled free a scrap of paper, ink smudged, edges worn. The scrawl read, "I lost my brother in the flood. I couldn't pull him out. I lived, and he did not. I built this cradle to make peace with what I failed to hold." Evelyn froze. She looked from the page to Cole. He stood with his hand still braced on the cradle, his eyes turned aside, his palm flattened as if holding down memory itself. In a rush, she understood. The cradle was not only hers, not only for children yet to be. It was his way of speaking to ghosts, of meeting the boy he could not save. She folded the paper in her hand and stepped nearer. Placing her free hand over his, she pressed gently against the wood. The gesture stilled him. At last he looked at her, and she saw it. Pain, yes, but also a softness, a fragility he had never shown. "You don't have to carry that alone," she whispered. "This cradle, it belongs to me too. We'll hold it together." Cole said nothing, but his fingers closed slowly over hers, firm and sure. In that moment, Evelyn felt the tether bind them, not through sudden love or pretty vows, but through the raw truth of loss. The small white cradle rocked between them, a silent witness to the first thread tying their lives. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Evelyn did not feel alone. The wind still pressed at the shutters, but in her chest another rhythm beat steady, certain. She knew Cole would never be a man of easy words, never lavish her with the speech of softer men. But he had begun to open, inch by inch, enough for her to see. And she understood that from now on, his silence was no longer a wall. It was soil rich and dark, where something new might take root. The cradle, white wood, awkward quilt, hidden note, would remain. A reminder that the past cannot be erased, but it can be mended when two hands, not one, are willing to hold it. That morning the sky opened clean after days of rain. White clouds drifted slow across the blue, and the ground, once soaked through, had hardened, cracked into wide patches of clay. From the porch, Evelyn shaded her eyes, watching Cole bent at work on the eastern fence line, where the storm winds had torn the barbed wire loose. The hammer rang steady, iron on wood, carrying clear through the hush of the hollow. Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron, ready to go lend help. But as she neared, she saw Cole jerk back, clutching his arm. A line of blood welled bright against his sleeve where the barbs had ripped him. "Cole?" Her voice broke sharp as she rushed to him. He stood fast, only a faint tightening at his brow, his voice flat. "Just a scratch." But the blood spilled quick, soaking red into his shirt. Evelyn's tone cut firm. "No, let me bind it." He shook his head, stooping again to catch the wire. "I've managed worse. Don't trouble yourself." Evelyn caught his arm and pulled hard. "Cole Thatcher, stop this. You think you're iron? You're flesh and blood. Leave it untended and it will fester." His eyes lifted to hers. For a moment the wall in them trembled. She held his gaze unwavering, until at last he sighed, dropped the hammer, and let her lead him back to the porch. In the kitchen she set water to boil, pulled down the small wooden box of cloth and whiskey. Cole sat at the table, silent, arm dripping red. The shirt had torn wide, bearing muscle now streaked with blood. Evelyn clipped the cloth away, her hands unsteady, though her eyes stayed firm. "Hold it up." He obeyed, saying nothing. She poured the whiskey over the cut. The sting filled the air, sharp as fire. Blood and spirit ran together, dark on the floor. Cole drew breath through his teeth, sinews straining in his neck, but he made no sound. Evelyn looked up at him, jaw clenched, eyes fixed hard on the wall, and whispered, "If it hurts, you can say so." His gaze shifted back to hers. For the first time, it softened. He did not speak, but the silence between them carried no distance. It was admission. He was not unbreakable, not untouchable. She pressed the cloth to the wound, wrapping each strip with care. Her fingers brushed the rough heat of his skin, steadying where his strength faltered. Her heart raced. though she forced her breath to calm. When the bandage tied firm at last, she said quietly, "There, keep it clean. No heavy work for a few days." Cole looked at her long, unreadable, before dipping his head. His voice came low, gravel deep. "Thank you." 2 words, but to Evelyn, they were more than she had yet received from him, unguarded, unforced. Her smile broke, tremulous with tears. Sometimes letting someone tend you isn't weakness. It just means you're not alone anymore. He did not answer, but his eyes gentled and lingered. He looked from the white bandage on his arm back to her face. The space that had always yawned between them seemed smaller. Cole stayed in that afternoon, mending his old boots on the porch, while Evelyn stitched his torn shirt in the kitchen. They spoke little, but each time their eyes met, they held a moment longer than before. By nightfall, the moon silvered the hollow. Evelyn set a bowl of hot soup before him. He tasted, gave a single nod. No praise, yet enough. Later she lay in her bed, heart full of something she had not known in years. For the first time since arriving, she did not feel entirely alone. That man of silence had let her touch his wound. Flesh, yes, but something deeper, too. And Evelyn knew she had found the first crack in his stone wall. On the porch, Cole sat with his arm bandaged white, gaze lifted toward her window. He did not name it, not even to himself. But for the first time in many years, he felt he was no longer standing alone against the world. That morning the yard erupted in chaos. Evelyn had just kindled the stove when the shrill cry of hens shattered the quiet, wings flapping wild, feathers scattering white against the earth. She ran out, apron flying, just in time to glimpse a russet shadow slipping beyond the fence into the brush. 3 birds gone, nothing left but drifting down. "Fox!" Evelyn gasped, clutching her chest. Cole came at once from the far field. He bent without a word, studying the sharp tracks pressed into the soil, leading clean toward the woods. Evelyn wrapped her arms tight, voice trembling. "It's already taken some. If it comes back—" His eyes lifted, dark as storm clouds. He straightened, saying only, "I'll see to it." By evening he was at the fence line with iron traps, his movements sure, practiced. Evelyn watched uneasily as he set the jaws, baited them, covered them with leaves. They glinted cruel under the dusk. "You're certain it will return?" she asked. Cole's voice came low. "A fox that's tasted blood doesn't leave." Then, slower, meeting her eyes, "But it won't take from this place again." That night, Evelyn lay awake, every creak of the yard pulling her upright. She heard Bristle's low growl, the clink of chain, then a shriek that split the dark. Wrapping her shawl, she ran to the door. Under the wan moon, Cole stood by a sprung trap. The fox twisted, eyes blazing, leg caught firm. It spat fury, teeth bared. Cole approached with steady calm, revolver in hand. Evelyn held her breath. But he did not fire at once. He crouched, eye to eye with the creature, and lingered there. The fox snarled, writhing, but he did not flinch. At last he spoke, voice low but clear enough for Evelyn to hear. "Only kill when need calls, but if something threatens your home, never turn your back." Then the shot rang, sharp as a bell. The fox fell still. Evelyn shivered, yet there was no revulsion in her heart. Only the cold certainty of protection, fierce and uncompromising. At dawn, Cole skinned the pelt, keeping its red gloss whole. Evelyn thought of her sons, of the lesson Cole would likely give them one day. Do not kill for sport, but defend what is yours. That evening she found her mind still circling the sound of the gun, the sight of the fox lying still. After supper, when Cole slipped outside, she followed. Moonlight shone clear over the hollow. The wind was cool, carrying scents of damp grass and wild earth. Evelyn climbed the slope behind the house and saw him there, a tall shadow on the ridge, hands loose at his sides, head bowed. As she drew nearer, the light revealed the rise before him, a small mound of earth overgrown with weeds. At its crest stood a wooden cross, gray with years, carved with marks so faint they were almost gone. Evelyn halted, heart stuttering. The grave was too small, a child's grave. Cole did not turn, though he must have known she was there. After a long silence, his voice came deep and slow. Don't be afraid. Just an old grave. Evelyn said nothing. Questions burned on her tongue. Whose child? Was it yours? Is this why you live apart? Why you bury yourself in silence? But she held them in. Some truths were not pried loose. Some griefs were only honored by standing near. Cole's rough hand touched the cross, moonlight catching the lines of his face, carved hard with weariness, with unspoken sorrow. Evelyn watched him and knew this was the root of the cradle, the source of his solitude. The white wood he had built was not only for her, not only for the children she might bring. It was also for the one that lay beneath this hill, carried away years ago. Her eyes blurred with tears. She stepped back, leaving him to the grave, as though it permitted only one mourner close. But she carried the image with her. The man, the cross, the weight of a loss too old for words. Back inside, she sat by the hearth, hands knotted in her lap. The lamp burned low, but the picture of the hilltop seared in her mind. For the first time, Evelyn no longer feared Cole's silence. She understood now. Behind it lay graves, ghosts, and memories that had starved for witness. And if she truly meant to stay, she would need the patience to wait, for him to share them piece by piece in his own time. Rain had beaten down for 3 days without pause. The hollow lay drowned in gray, the cottonwoods dripping, their branches bowed as if in surrender. The ground about the yard had turned to mire, sucking at every step, while the creek beyond roared higher than she had ever seen, though not yet spilling its banks. Inside the cabin, the hearth glowed with restless flame, casting red and gold across the log walls. Evelyn sat at the table, needle in hand, her stitches wandering unevenly in the dim light. Rain hammered the roof, steady as 1,000 drums, relentless and unbroken. Across from her, Cole sat near the fire, his boots set close to dry, steam rising faint as smoke. He whittled absently at a scrap of wood, eyes fixed on the flames. The room held only the sound of rain, of thread sliding through cloth, of blade rasping over grain. Evelyn pressed her lips tight, guiding her needle. She had grown used to this rhythm, the silence that shaped each evening here. Yet tonight, it felt heavier, pressing down on them both. At length, Cole spoke. His voice was rough, halting, as if each word had to be dug from stone. I've lived behind fences too long. The words startled her, so she froze, needle mid-air. In the lamp's glow, his face, always so set, showed a crack, a weakness breaking through. He kept his eyes on the fire. voice low and steady, as if confessing to no one but himself. Fences keep horses in, keep wolves out. But they've kept me, too. I got so used to standing alone I forgot. Maybe someone might want to step inside. Evelyn set her work aside, clutching the edge of the cloth. A warmth surged through her chest, grief and hope in the same breath. She knew how rare this moment was, like stone parting to reveal a hidden spring. Her answer came soft, careful, as though words themselves might shatter it. Cole, I've never asked you to change. I only ask you, let me in. The room stilled. Rain drummed. The fire popped. But between them hung something new. Cole turned at last, his gaze holding hers longer than ever before. No wall, no stone, just a tremor, a fragile yielding. He let out a long breath, as if laying down a burden that had weighted him for years. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. He bent forward, elbows on his knees, hand covering half his face. His voice rasped low. I'm no good at this. Don't know how to... Evelyn rose and crossed the space between them. She laid her hand upon his arm, small against his strength, but steady. You don't need to know how. Just let me be here. The rest, we'll learn together. Cole lowered his hand, meeting her eyes fully. For the first time, he did not look away. In that gray depth, she saw fear, yes, but also longing, the quiet hunger to trust again. Slowly, he nodded, the motion slight but sure, as if bowing to a truth he could not deny. Outside, the rain poured on. But within the cabin, Evelyn felt something shift. A door, unseen, had opened. Not wide, not yet. But enough. Enough for her to step through. They spoke no more that night. She returned to her seat, stitches trembling under her fingers. He sat still, the fire softening his features into something gentler than she had known. Their silence remained, but it was no longer a gulf. It was a shared hearth, the kind that binds two souls who have weathered too long in their own storms. As the lamp guttered low, Evelyn lifted her eyes to the window. The downpour had eased. The creek still thundered, but it no longer sounded like a threat. She thought then, another current had broken loose in this house, a stream freed at last from stone. And she knew Cole's words of fences were not only confession, they were a first step at unlatching the gate. For her, for him, and for a home neither had dared believe could be theirs. The rain had broken, and sunlight poured pale across the hollow. Steam rose from the wet earth, the smell of mud and grass thick in the air. Cole hitched the wagon, and for the first time since she had come, took Evelyn with him beyond the fence line. The wheels splashed through shallow puddles that glittered in the light, and Evelyn sat with her hands folded over an empty basket, stealing glances at the man beside her. It struck her. How rare this was. Cole leaving the fence. Cole letting her ride at his side. His head bent beneath the brim of his hat, but his shoulders were not locked in iron as they once had been. Behind them lay the cabin, waiting. Ahead lay Burnt Hollow, and this trip felt less like an errand than a trial. Could they walk the wider world together? The town was loud with life, hawkers calling out, children darting between wagons, horses stamping in the dust. The mingled scents of leather, yeast, and fresh-cut cloth filled the air. Evelyn slipped into the fabric stall, her fingers brushing over bolts of muslin and bright calico. She paused at a pale green, tender as new spring leaves. Holding it against her chest, she turned, her smile small but certain. "For the cradle, I won't ask leave." Cole studied her, then gave a slow nod. His voice came low, without strain. "I won't stop you." 4 words only, yet they opened a space as wide as the prairie sky. They bought salt, flour, thread. Then they turned homeward, the wagon rattling over ruts, the sun slanting low and soft. Evelyn leaned against the side, the fabric warm in her lap, and for a moment it felt as if the world held only the two of them. But as they rolled past the saloon on the town's edge, a voice rang out, half surprise, half scorn. "Well now, if it ain't Cole Thatcher." The wagon jolted. Evelyn looked and saw a bearded man, eyes squinting mean with liquor. He staggered forward, crooked grins splitting his face. "Silent Cole, I figured you disappeared after what happened back in 17. The air thickened. Cole's hands clamped tight on the reins, knuckles white, jaw locked. He said nothing, only flicked the team forward. But the man's voice carried after them. "That night, blood filled the creek. Folks said you killed him." Evelyn turned, startled, but Cole's face was carved of stone, eyes dark and shuttered. She felt the weight of his silence, heavy, immovable, as the wagon creaked on through the mud. Not until the town had vanished behind them did he speak. His voice was raw, ground down by years. "I didn't kill him." Evelyn's breath caught. He kept his eyes on the road, unmoving but for the twitch of muscle in his jaw. "But," the words stalled. He dragged the rest like iron from his chest. "I didn't save him either." The wind tore across the ridge, lifting the loose strands of her hair. That single sentence bore the weight of a lifetime. His voice fell lower, a hoarse murmur. "He was my brother." We argued by the creek, over nothing worth a breath. The flood rose, the horses spooked. He slipped. I saw him fall, saw his hand reaching, and I froze. I watched until the water took him. By the time they came, there was only his body. They said I pushed. I didn't. But I didn't pull him out either. Evelyn sat stricken. The road stretched endless, gray and empty, but in her ears, pulsed only his words. "I didn't save him." She saw then. His silence was not habit, but armor. A shield forged at 17, when guilt and rumor had branded him murderer. A scar no voice had ever lifted. She reached across the bench, laying her hand on his arm. He flinched at the touch, unaccustomed, raw. Yet she held firm. "You are no killer, Cole. If you were, I'd have seen it from the start. What I see is a man carrying too heavy a burden and believing he has no right to lay it down." For a moment his shoulders sank, as though she had lifted a weight none else could touch. His eyes flickered, unsteady. They rode the rest of the way in silence, not the locked silence of stone, but the kind that comes after truth is spoken and cannot be taken back. When the wagon creaked into the yard, the sky was aflame with sunset, the hills burning crimson. Evelyn held the green cloth close to her heart. Her pulse quickened. She knew. Today she had not only chosen fabric for a cradle, she had been given a shard of Cole's past, something no one else had ever been allowed to hear. And she understood now. Stepping through his fence meant more than sharing a roof. It meant entering wounds left unhealed, secrets buried deep, and a heart that had stood silent since the age of 17. Winter came sooner than either of them had reckoned. Cold winds sliced through Burnt Hollow, stripping the cottonwoods bare until only gray limbs shivered beneath a sky the color of ash. A dusting of early snow clung to the new stretch of fence, frosting the half-finished work Cole had left there. Inside the cabin, the hearth burned bright, casting warmth into every corner. Evelyn sat close, wrapped in a thick woolen shawl, her hand resting lightly on the swell of her belly. A smile ghosted her lips. Each small stirring within reminded her that what had once felt fragile, a bond held together by silence and wary glances, had now taken root in something alive. Cole came in through the back door, a scatter of snowflakes still clinging to his shoulders. He stripped off his gloves, hung his heavy coat on the peg, and let his eyes drift across the room until they found her. His steps slowed. Without a word, he moved to the fire, rubbing his hands before the blaze. In the hush, Evelyn spoke softly. "Cole, I think it's time I wrote a letter." His brow drew faintly together, a question hovering unsaid. Evelyn laid her hand on her belly, her eyes glowing in the firelight. "I'll tell my parents. It's time to bring Daniel and Matthew home." Cole stood very still. His gray eyes flickered, troubled, and for a moment she feared refusal. But then his face gentled. He pulled up a chair beside her and sat, voice low and roughened by the cold. "You're sure? Winter's a hard one. The boys, they need a home," Evelyn cut in, her tone trembling yet steadfast. "And this time they'll have a father." Silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of pine wood. Cole stared into the flames, the light gleaming across the faint scar on his hand. At last he gave a slow nod, an oath in its own right. Evelyn breathed out, as if a door long barred had opened at last. That night, the blizzard came. The wind shrieked over the roof, snow lashed the windows, but within they sat side by side, wrapped in a single quilt, sharing warmth as the storm clawed at the walls. Evelyn dipped her pen, the lamp trembling at her elbow, and wrote in a steady hand, "I have found a home. Cole is not what folks whisper. He is quiet, but steadfast. I believe now Daniel and Matthew can return. Please prepare them for the journey come spring." She laid down the pen, eyes burning. Cole did not glance at the page, yet she knew he had heard every word. His hand closed over hers, rough, scarred, but steady. That was answer enough. The days of storm wore on. Cole split wood, checked the roof, kept the barn secure. Evelyn tended the fire, cooked, sewed. Evenings they read from an old book with a cracked spine, or simply let the silence rest easy between them. When the wind battered the shutters, Evelyn flinched, but Cole fastened the door and returned to her side, saying only, "I'm here." 4 simple words, but they struck deeper than any vow. She leaned her head against his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart against the fury outside. Through those long nights, she told him of her childhood, of running barefoot through prairie grass, of the hurt of being abandoned. Cole never interrupted. He only listened, nodding now and then, until at last he said, halting and raw, "I feared no one would ever stay." Evelyn clasped his hand, whispering, "I'm here, and soon the boys will be too." The cabin in the storm became more than shelter. It became proof. Their family was no longer a hope but a certainty. Evelyn, Cole, the sons she would bring, and the new life growing within her. On the final night of the blizzard, snow lay heavy on the eaves. Cole stoked the fire, and the glow lit his face, not hard and cold as when she had first seen him, but softened, steady. Evelyn watched him, her voice a murmur almost too soft for him to hear. "We'll have a true home." Cole turned, his gray eyes glinting with quiet promise. He gave no words, but she felt his answer all the same. That spring came late, yet it carried a warmth that felt almost like mercy. After long months buried in snow, the earth softened beneath their boots. Green shoots pressed upward, and the creek once again sang across the valley. Evelyn sat by the window, her belly round and heavy, watching sunlight pour through the cabin. From outside drifted the rhythm of hammer on wood, Cole shaping a cradle with patient hands. The birth came on a morning bright with sky-blue promise. Evelyn lay spent but radiant, her arms cradling a small, dark-haired daughter whose cries filled a house once accustomed to silence. Cole stepped forward, his rough hands awkward but steady, lifting the child as though he had waited his whole life for this moment. "Clara," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling with joy. "My mother's name." Cole gave a small nod, his gaze fixed on the tiny face. "Clara," he repeated, the word weighted like a vow. The new cradle he had built stood ready by the bed, pine carved with leaves and stars, lined with quilts stitched by Evelyn through the winter storm. When they laid Clara inside, the gentle rocking no longer carried emptiness. It carried the breath of new life. News traveled homeward swiftly. Before long, Daniel and Matthew arrived at the ranch. Evelyn met them at the gate, clutching her sons close. Daniel stood taller now, his eyes alight with curiosity. Matthew still shy, clinging to his mother's skirts until he spotted the cradle and the baby within. Behind them, Cole stood watch, face solemn, though in his eyes a softer light stirred. That evening, for the first time, the house rang with children's laughter. Daniel raced about, pestering Cole with questions of horses and fences. Matthew nestled near his mother, though his gaze wandered again and again to the cradle's occupant. Cole remained quiet, stepping in only to steady a boy about to stumble or to lift the heavy pail from Evelyn's hand. His silence was no longer distance. It was the foundation upon which every sound found its place. Day after day, the cabin grew fuller. The clatter of knives against the board as Evelyn cooked, Daniel's shouts in the yard learning to ride, Matthew's giggles as he sifted dirt through his fingers, Clara's cries breaking the night, all wove together into a song of home. Cole spoke little, but his presence was the beam holding the roof against storm and sun alike. By summer, Cole had Daniel at his side repairing fence, teaching him the heft of a hammer and the patience to test every wire. Evelyn watched from the porch, her heart swelling at the boy's proud stance. Matthew clung closer to her, yet slowly warmed each time Cole's strong hands lifted him onto a horse or steadied his small frame. Clara grew in the midst of it all, her babbling joining the murmur of the valley wind. Years unfurled. Evelyn's hair silvered at the temples. Cole's face bore deeper lines. Yet the house never again knew the hollow quiet of its beginnings. Firelight glowed nightly, fed not just by pine logs but by the warmth of lives entwined beneath the roof. One autumn evening, the sky blazed crimson as the sun fell. Evelyn and Cole leaned together against the fence, watching the children. Daniel, now a young man, rode with confidence across the pasture. Matthew whittled at a block of wood, coaxing out the shape of a deer. Clara, hair tumbling to her shoulders, ran laughing after the old black dog that once kept lonely guard. Their laughter rang out, a hymn without end. Evelyn sighed softly, resting her head against Cole's shoulder. "We've found peace." Cole's eyes followed the children, his voice low and steady. "No, we built it." Her lips curved into a quiet smile, for she knew he was right. This peace was not a gift bestowed. It was forged in storm and sorrow, in wounds tended, in silences learned and slowly broken. Beside the hearth, the first cradle still stood, now holding Clara's dolls and blankets. No longer a symbol of loss, it bore witness to all they had endured and all they had made. As twilight folded over the valley, Evelyn's heart brimmed with gratitude. Beside her stood the man once called Silent Cole, once walled away behind grief and rumor, now the anchor of a family. And she knew they had not only found a house, they had shaped a life, hammer by hammer, stitch by stitch, hand in hand. The cradle that once waited empty had become a testament to a home that would endure every season to come. If you have ever lived through loss, through empty seasons, you may know better than anyone the true worth of a home filled with laughter, or simply the quiet presence of someone beside you that makes the heart feel warm. I believe this story is not only about the faraway Wild West, but also a gentle reminder that no matter our age, the heart can always find a place to rest. If this story has stirred a memory or brought warmth to your heart, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep these tender stories alive for ourselves and for the generations to come.